Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are around the world. And welcome to today's roundtable that the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, ISPI, is co-promoting with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies in cooperation with the CSIS Indonesia, Ecologic Institute, ERIA, KIEP, SIIS in China, and the OECD. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm Antonio Villafranca, the Director of Studies at ISPI. ISPI is the National Coordinator and Chair of the T20. Today's roundtable is promoted in the context of the T20, which is a network of hundreds of leading think tanks around the world, which is the official engagement group of the G20. So we are supposed to provide policy recommendations to the G20 leaders in view of the G20 summit later on this year in Rome. This public event was preceded by a closed-door meeting among experts on the same topic, sustainable recovery for a green future, or in other words, how to make global recovery after the pandemic consistent with a green future. This is the question mark, the big question that we will try to answer today in 1 hour and so. And today is actually a special day. After an impressive step change from the previous US administration, President Joe Biden is convening the Leaders' Summit on Climate, which is intended as a milestone towards the COP26 in November in Glasgow, with some clear-cut objectives. First and foremost, catalyze efforts of 40 leaders and private actors to keep the 1.5-degree goal within reach. This is essential, of course, in order to mitigate as much as possible the devastating and dramatic effects of climate change. And all this while stressing the importance of the green transition in terms of course, recovery in a post-pandemic context, jobs and cohesion. The US is also announcing a 2030 emission target, thus following other states which have already announced ambitious targets in terms of carbon neutrality by 2050 or so, including the EU, China by 2060, Japan, and others. So in the very day of this Leaders' Summit, let's start our roundtable without political leaders. They were already taken, sorry for this, but with very distinguished experts and representatives of international organizations. So without further ado, let me start with the first panelist, who is June Arima, Senior Policy Fellow of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area. So, June, thank you very much for joining us today. There are many developing countries in Asia, and sometimes there is the perception that economic growth and environmental sustainability are at odds with each other. I mean, if you really want to proceed very quickly in your growth path, well, climate is a side objective. Is not exactly as important as the economic growth. So how to avoid, in your view, this apparent, of course, inconsistency between growth and climate change? Please, June.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antonio, for a very stimulating question. And this is really a challenging question because, as you know, Asia is a region where the bulk of the incremental or CO2 emissions and energy demand is occurring between now and 2030 and beyond. And for environmental sustainability, I think coexistence between economic growth and the air pollution prevention is relatively easy. Because if you take some measures for combating air pollution, you could feel the benefit of those policies directly in that region. But concerning climate change, the situation is more complicated because greenhouse gases are coming from almost all the economic activities. And there has been a strong correlation between economic growth and greenhouse gas emissions. and many Asian countries are aiming at higher growth and a higher living standard and so on. And even though you take stringent mitigation policies, you cannot feel the benefit of that mitigation policy directly, because the impact of the mitigation policies will be spread all over the world globally. So therefore, the benefit global, but at cost local. That is the most difficult feature of the climate change. So, and I think, in order to say overcome this situation, I think, rather than, setting just a target for the sake of target, I think most important thing is how quickly we can prepare enabling environment for a low carbon future with affordable cost. And affordable cost is a key. Since developing countries will not embrace very much expensive, prescription for coping with climate change. So, and also we need to acknowledge that they will have to depend on fossil fuels in the coming decades, looking at the energy reality of that region. So in that regard, I think how quickly we can develop hydrogen technologies or CCUS technologies, which could be utilized for neutralizing carbon emissions from the fossil fuel use in this region. And I think for that purpose, the technology development is very, very important. And developed countries should collaborate for developing those technologies as soon as possible and try to disseminate those technologies. That would be the key for, say, pragmatic, low carbon future and then decarbonization in the region. Thank you.
June, no, it is important, especially your emphasis on the importance of cost. I mean, if we really want to make, consistent growth and, climate change, cost is key. So in light of the evolution of cost of renewables, especially for the future, do you think that, these, very ambitious targets in terms of carbon neutrality by the EU, by China and other countries, hopefully also by the United States, are credible? I mean, is it true they will really be able to do so?
And I think you are asking very much provocative question again. To be frank, I think, the EU target, say 55% by 2030 or carbon neutrality by 2050 or something. I think it sounds to me as some sort of political slogan. And, the renewable is getting cheaper, yes, but, the endowment of renewable energy resources differs from country to country. And EU has certain advantage because it is interconnected by transmission lines across the countries. So perhaps, cheap solar power can be, transported to Northern Europe, and cheap wind power in the Northern Europe can be transported to Southern Europe. But in ASEAN, for example, the grid connection across the country is not so strong. And also the endowment of wind power sources are not so strong in ASEAN countries. And also the ASEAN countries are very much rapidly industrializing, and they will need the large amount of power. Of course, there will be a role for distributed power generation, like solar and wind. But in order to satisfy the incremental energy demand in Asian countries, it is an illusion to consider that renewable can satisfy all the incremental energy demand or electricity demand in the region. So I think renewable will play a role, but we should not, how can I say disabuse ourselves that renewable can solve everything. Renewable is one of the solutions, but we need to also consider, how to decarbonize, fossil fuel use, or how to, improve energy efficiency and so on. So otherwise, that package will not be regarded as realistic from the viewpoint of ASEAN countries.
Thank you, Jun, for also being so frank and direct in your answer. So I mean, we need a transformation of the energy sector, that's for sure, if you want to achieve carbon neutrality. So now let me move to the second panelist, Zai Yongping, Chief of the Energy Sector Group of the Asian Development Bank. Yongping, please let us better understand, I mean, what kind of a transition the energy sector really need in order to make, you know, this slogan, political slogan at the moment. We hope it's not going to be like this, but let's make this political slogan concrete. What kind of changes we need in the energy sector to make it a concrete goal? We cannot hear you, Yongping. Yeah, probably your microphone.
I'm sorry.
Okay, please.
I'm very sorry. Okay, I should start saying that I want to be as frank as Mr. Arima, giving your answer straightforward, that we do have this vision of carbon neutrality, whether we believe it, we don't believe it, how to achieve it. We put this aside a little bit later. I think we need to go for a no-regret policy, that we're doing something, that we're pushing for something that eventually is good for us, for this generation and for future generation. We have to believe in that. So that said, I think we need to be very pragmatic and making things happen. When we do this transition from conventional power systems to a future renewable energy-based system, some people say 100% renewable energy, between this current system that is working well, I must say that I'm an engineer. All engineers know that the current system is working. And the future system will be 100% renewable, zero carbon. How that would work, we need to learn. We have to make sure that works, and we hope that works, and that's our vision. But during this process, we have to make sure there are two things we have to make sure. One is a just transition, making sure that when we phase out some of these old systems, nobody should be left out. You know, these co-workers, the workers in the power plant, and the communities in the mining areas, in the, those people should not be suffering. I think that's something we have to make sure that when we develop new energy solutions, we want to show this is inclusive, everybody will get benefit of that. That's one part of this concern I want to share.
If I can react on this specifically, because of course we all agree on the fact that nobody should be left behind. But the point is that if you are a rich country, you can count on your fiscal resources and on your ability to increase your debt, and we are doing a lot. In Italy, we are real experts on increasing our debt. But if you are a poor country, if you're a developing country, probably you don't have the financial, economic resources to do so. What should be done at the international, multilateral level, I mean, to avoid this scenario?
I think there are two answers to this question. I'll come back to my old theory, not finished. But anyway, to answer your specific question, I think that, of course, a bank like Asian Development Bank, we're providing some money, but where I count my money, it's only 1% of the requirement. So it's not enough. We need commercial banks. We need other sources. We need private sector. We need everyone's contribution. Even in a poor country, when you say poor, it's because it's a level of development. It's because it's developing. I think every country has its potential. It's our job to find out that potential and develop that potential. And every country was not only surviving, but developing and becoming a middle-income country. I'll tell you something interesting. When Asian Development Bank was established 55 years ago, every country in Asia was a developing country. Even Japan was a developing country, Korea. And today, there's only 2 of them are considered least developed countries. Other Asian countries have moved into some kind of middle income, lower middle income, higher upper middle income. So the time can tell us countries can develop, countries can become rich. So I think it's a question of finding right resources, and we do have resources in each country. I'll come back to my earlier point that the other concern I have with energy transition is the transition has to be a secure and safe one. We have noticed some countries are going very fast in new solutions, and they have experienced a blackout in the power system. Things are not working. Transmission lines broken, and they need to have investment in the transmission distribution, making sure that in this transition from old system, from conventional power system into new power system, the system has to be reliable. I don't want to see, and people don't want to see, blackout. And this is a lesson learned we have seen from other countries. So making sure that our country have resources developed and becoming rich, and making sure nobody is left out, and making sure that this transition is safe. ADB is contributing only less than 1%. We need everybody in this game. Thank you.
So thank you. I will be back to you, but let me move to Luis de Mello, because now we are talking about resources, and of course, especially for mature economies, resources are to some extent available. In Europe, for instance, of course, we have the Next Generation EU, and one of the main targets of this fund is, green transition. So if we take all these recovery plans together around the world, can they really be seen as an unprecedented opportunity to decarbonize our economy? Luis, please.
Thanks, Antonio. This is a great question, and it's a great that we are having this conversation today on Earth Day. So let me take the opportunity to come back to this issue of the recovery. Hopefully we're going to have this pandemic behind us. Has been a dreadful experience, a huge economic, social, human costs, but the beauty of it is that there is an opportunity here associated with the recovery. And it is an opportunity to basically advance this needed transition to a low carbon economy. Related to that, I have basically a few points that come to mind. If you cast it in a broader setting of a recovery from a deep economic crisis. Take, for instance, the need for some reallocation of capital and labor during this recovery. This is common to all recoveries. There is always an element of reallocation when the economy is coming back. And this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity because essentially you can afford to shift the resources away from sectors and activities that have been most affected by this pandemic, and in sectors where this effect has been most durable, and then move towards sectors and firms that have more promising economic prospects. So this is a general context of a recovery. Why is it important for the green transition? Because it is an opportunity to basically move away from polluting, low productivity activity sectors, firms, towards greener, higher productivity ones. If this reallocation doesn't take place, we're going to end up in a situation where assets will be stranded in distressed firms, capital will not flow to sectors and firms that will be in most need of investment in the recovery. Jobs will not be created to the tune that is needed to reduce those transition costs that both June and Yongpin mentioned a minute ago. So part of it is seizing the opportunity of this reallocation, and part of it is to make sure that we can minimize these transition costs at a time when the economies will be picking up in activity. Another point that comes to mind, Antonio, is innovation. Again, it was mentioned before, all the innovation that has allowed for a reduction in costs in PV panels, batteries, green fuels over the years. So that has reduced the cost of decarbonization relative to the alternative, to the carbon-intensive alternatives. We need to benefit from this during a period of recovery, because there is an opportunity to speed up the take-up of these technologies during this period of pick-up of economic activity. And there is a moment here, normally when economies pick up, the price of fossil fuels also increases, but is increased demand. So the price of oil is going to rise during the recovery. That's what happens in every recovery. So it's an added boost to the take-up of greener technologies in this process. Another case that comes to mind, Antonio, if you allow me a couple of more minutes, and to come back to your point of the recovery packages, there is huge opportunity there for making decarbonization really an integral part and objective of the investments that are going to come on stream. This is not only through higher public investment, which is core to some of the recovery packages, an opportunity that it presents for shifting emphasis on green investment, but also to remove harmful subsidies, subsidies on fossil fuels, for instance, that are bad for decarbonization, but are also a burden on already stretched government budgets. And a final opportunity, Antonio, is the idea of ambitions and commitments. And that's important. There is the Leaders Summit today. We've been talking about this. What I find crucial to bear in mind here is that setting clear directions on intent and objectives is a huge help to reduce policy uncertainty. Firms simply don't invest if there is uncertainty about environmental policies, about direction of policy. We know that ambitious decarbonization will require not only government funds, but also private investment. I mean, we have done some work showing that how damaging a lack of policy certainty can be for investment overall. So let's use also the opportunity of this recovery to clarify where we want to go, to raise the ambition, and then to make sure that we stick to the plan so that firms invest, so that there is less uncertainty that may create, basically extra obstacles to this process that should be here over term.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you also for serving as the lead co-chair of the task force of the T20, which is specifically dedicated to these issues. And of course, we will bring together all these inputs and we will deliver them to the G20 leaders later on this year in the context of G20 Italy. But Luis, I just cherry pick some points from your introductory remarks. Basically, in order to make these recovery plans successful in terms of carbon neutrality, of green transition, basically we have to put together industrial, fiscal, research and development policies. I mean, we need a mix of national and international policies to make it successful. So now let me move to Yu Hongyuan, who is director of the Institute for Comparative Politics and Public Policy of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. So, Hongyang, from your point of view, in order to make this recovery plan successful, what are the key ingredients? I mean, to make a very tasteful and very good recipe for our green future. Please.
Thanks, Chair. I think I can use maybe four keywords to answer your questions. First is maybe the cohesive, the second resilience, the third balanced, and the fourth and the last no regret. The first is cohesive. That we should make the sustainable development into all this post-pandemic investment to make that means we should in doing the investment for the transport, for industry transport, electricity power, and for even the buildings investment. We should also to make the sustainable development, this development philosophy as a cohesive sectors for all the investment process, because we should make it sustainable for our pandemic development. As we know, after the pandemic, more and more countries will make investment, public or private investment will become suddenly increase. This also will damage I think the low carbon or low carbon economy, or even damage the electricity power industry, the power grid stability. So we should when we make this investment, we should make sustainable development as a cohesive doing all the process for our investment. And the second is resilience, because we should make a nexus thinking for the energy health and food, water, and resources for after pandemic, because we should build the more and stronger resilience for our country, for our city, and for our the community. We make it more and more resilience. Because when we talk about the green finance, we not only to just pay attention to use the finance to support the renewable clean development, but also we should to allocate more and more finance money to support the adaptation to climate disaster, to the health crisis, to the water, energy, food nexus challenges of the pandemic. We should also pay more attention to the currently the developing countries' crisis for their economic pandemic and the debt crisis. These nexus challenges, we should pay more attention to how to try to use the finance to make a stronger and more stronger resilience world. And the third is the balance. We should make just I borrow this concept from the energy security. It's a full balanced solution for availability, affordability, accountability, and accessibility to our the green future. Because we should also because currently a large, huge population in the world have no access to clean water, to the modern electricity services. When we to talk about green finance, we should also to make a balanced solutions to make the availability, affordability, to make the price of the green development cheaper and cheaper for all the developing countries, all the poor countries, and particularly make our the solutions to carbon neutrality to also help them to achieve the SDG goals before 2030. And also the last but very important is how to prevent the carbon lock-in effect used by no regret investment. So when we make every investment from public or private sectors, we should to make the no regret particularly for the lecture, and also to make some. I think we should to build some kind of the coordination network for G20 members for the rise to zero emissions. We should use this no regret and this clean development to try to launch some the G20 member cities cooperation or business cooperation, and to build the cooperation between the business, think tanks, and the government, just to make a very cautious, no regret and balanced investment for after the pandemic. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you also for stressing the importance of some buzzwords for climate change, carbon neutrality, and growth, which are sustainability, resilience, and cooperation, as you said. But now let me move to Camilla Bausch. Camilla is director of the Ecologic Institute in Berlin, in Germany. So welcome, Camilla. Nice to see you again, actually. Camilla, so far we have been talking about, a net zero emission goal, whether or not it's going to be just a political slogan. Let's hope it's not, of course, that there will be concrete measures and also binding legislation in states in order to achieve this goal. But let's try to understand, Camilla, please, also for the broad audience, why it is so important to achieve carbon neutrality by the mid-century in order to effectively fight, climate change. Please, Camilla.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. Happy Earth Day to everybody who is watching. And it was really great to hear my colleagues just speaking. I will react to that a little bit later and take some seconds for that. But first, to your question, why is it so important? Well, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is probably the body who has the most comprehensive effort of looking at all scientific information about climate change, looked at the situation and the outcomes of hundreds of research projects, and found that actually, if we want to keep within the limits of what we have set out in the Paris Agreement as a global goal, meaning preventing dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system by staying well below 2 degrees Celsius global temperature increase, with an aim actually to stay or to work towards the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. So if we want to reach that, we have to reduce our emissions to net zero. If you're in the 1.5 degree scenario, it would be around mid of century. If you're in the 2 degree scenario, it would be around 2070. And you obviously also have to reduce drastically. Now you have basically to peak around this time we are living in, and then reduce by 2030 and beyond. So, and in this context, if you do that, and if you implement that, it needs long-term strategies. And if you have long-term strategies, you should actually, and the IPCC spells that out, look also at synergies. And that links to what we have just heard from Mr. Yu, that links to adaptation, but also other objectives like food security, public health, access to clean energy, or poverty alleviation. And there are these co-benefits. And in this context, I want to react to the just transition issue Luis de Meo has mentioned. I think it's a very important issue. And we have the Just Transition Fund, for example, in Europe, and it is a politically important reference. I think we should, when we talk about it, think about the workers who will be affected directly, but also think about those people who are affected negatively by the situation as it is. Just think of the air quality issues, which usually really strikes the poor people the most, and think about issues. So if we think about just transition, think about also the people who will be better off with the change and are actually negatively affected.
Sorry for interrupting you. I mean, of course, you are emphasizing that. I want to know also the point of view of Luis, but I mean, when we talk about the Just Transition Fund, I mean, it's relatively small. I mean, it's not going to be to have such a huge, impact. I mean, the rationale behind that, of course, is the one you presented, but in terms of size, is not so big, frankly speaking, because you know that European countries are quite jealous of their social policy. Luis, do you agree?
Yes, indeed, Antonio, this is a very important point. I'm glad also, Camilla, that you brought that up, because now when we talk about opportunities, we need to also talk about how to make those opportunities come to fruition. In the case of the just transition, we know that even when impacts of tightening environmental standards and regulations, even when they have an adverse economic impact or a social impact, we know that sometimes the average impact may not be so huge, but it's very unequal across firms, across workers, and so on. So what can we do there to make sure that we use the right instruments to deal with that? I would say that there is a huge role for policy to play. Protecting those who face job losses during the transition. How can you equip people with the skills, the education that they need to be reemployed in greener, more productive activities during the course of this transition, so that they benefit from the transition as well. Improving activation, retraining schemes, also extremely important in that respect. Strengthening social safety nets, especially for the most vulnerable, who may not have access to the other tools. Again, hugely important. We see that in developing countries, workers that may be adversely affected and that may not have access to social protection. So how can we deploy the tools that are at place to do this? So I think it is an opportunity. We have in many cases the tools. We need to be able to deploy them to make sure that they are used in a cost-effective manner and in a way that boosts inclusiveness at the same time. I think you would agree with me, Camila, right?
Yes, I'm happy to agree, and maybe we can even link it to Yun Arima's point on the need of technology development, because I think as important as technology development might be also in that context, capacity building and changing the structures, because what I've seen around the world, that sometimes it's really that the people we want to be leaders of change don't have the understanding, the tools, the education for change, and have difficulties accessing it. So building the capacities and structures which actually enable this societal challenge, it's a whole society in challenge, is a very important point. And the just transition elements you just mentioned, Luis, are part of that. And I think it links nicely to the overall debate.
Okay, now we move out of Europe, otherwise, we are criticized that we have the usual Eurocentric view of the world. So we move again to China, to the executive dean of the Chongyang Institute, my friend Van Ven. We are co-organizing actually this event with the Chongyang Institute, so thank you very much, Van. With you, I would also shift to the geopolitical field. I mean, yes, so far we have been talking about, technical aspects, financial aspects, but there is also a geopolitical game behind all these. Some commentators also speak of a new global green and low carbon economy war. And I mean, today, we love each other. Let me put it very informally, if I may. There is, this big meeting convened by President Joe Biden, but we know that the global context is a context of growing tensions, especially between the US and China, with the EU somehow in between, with some changes taking place over the last months. And we know that behind all that, there is also a technological competition, growing technological competition. So seen from Beijing, what is your point of view on this?
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. Very glad to hear. I think you mentioned a very important new terms, that is low carbon economy war. I think that this the word is war. Why we use a war? I think that the word want to describe the more and more serious competition on low carbon economy. So as we all know that nowadays there are over 110 countries. They announced that or they have made a major commitment to achieve carbon neutrality by 2040, 2050, and 2060. And I think this is a wonderful commitment. I think it's reflect a rare consensus among countries globally. I think this is a very wonderful things. But the problem is that there are still many questions to be answered. For example, we still don't know how to achieve these commitments, to my honesty. What they will be achieved by. And we are still not clear about what rules will be used to achieve the goal and who will take the leader in achieving them. Moreover, how funds will be invested to achieve their goals remains unknown. So I think there was 4 perspectives to understand why some comments describe this is a war. This is a low carbon economy war. First, From the perspective of global discourse and international competition to reshape the rules of a low carbon economy has begun. Because we all know that that we are facing a new round of international games and negotiations on relevant topics such as the identification of new green low carbon industry and formulation of various low carbon standards, including emission reduction and agreement of various green rules, including carbon trading. That's first. Second, from the perspectives of international economic and trade, a restriction of green economy and trade pattern has appeared. I think that, for example, the development of clean energy is faced with great opportunities, while traditional fossil energy is at risks of being transferred and or abandoned. That's second. Third, from the perspectives of technological innovation, a research and development race along the new green industrials is already steaming ahead at a full speed. So as my colleague said right now, that in the future, if emerging economies do not follow suit, they may lose this new round of industrial revolution. And this is third. The fourth point is from the perspective of fund flows and international investment and financing shift driven by green industrials has already taken place. So I think in the future, international capital will favor new green industrial with potential and production capacity. So I think this is very obvious. We describe it as a new carbon competition or new carbon economy war. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It is absolutely interesting what you said, Ven, but let me ask you something more about that, because as we said, today is a special day. I mean, finally we have, the President of the United States together with the President of China, together with the other 38 political leaders coming together. I mean, do you think that, these growing tensions on trade, on rules, on international rules between the US and China could be an impediment, an obstacle also for the key collaboration on climate change? Because there could be also another possible perspective which said, no, since they cannot cooperate on all the other fields, they will at least cooperate on these, even because, you can sell it very easily to your citizens. What do you think about it? I also would like to ask this question to the other panelists. Please, Ven.
Yeah, I think I think it's great for Biden administration bringing the United States back to the Paris agreement. But the problem is that nowadays, today it's very, very special. We all know that there are over 40 countries. They sit together and talking about the climate future. But the problem is that, nowadays there exists very serious, very huge strategic distrust between the United States and China. You can see every day that in United States they often suppress China. They often in the United States media they attack China every day. So we feel to my honestly we feel very some people in China they feel very angry. So I think of course China
the same also on the other side. I mean, that there is almost the same narrative in the other side. So
but still that we hope that China try our best to cooperation with the United States. We as we all know that China announced that carbon neutrality in 2060 and show our greater power responsibility. But the problem is that I think it's not. We hope that have a huge cooperation in the climate change between China and the United States. But it's not very easy. We try our best.
But since the world is not only the United States and China, and Asia is not only China, let me go back to Jun Arima. Jun, let me ask you something about the Asian perspective to carbon neutrality. I mean, there are some specificities on the Asian recipe to carbon neutrality. Please, Jun. You are muted, please. Unmute your microphone.
Sorry. Yes, thank you very much. And Asian perspective towards carbon neutrality, I think that is a stepwise approach, I think. And they cannot change their energy system overnight. And they will have to say, pick up low-hanging fruits, such as energy efficiency and switching from coal to natural gas, and eventually natural gas to renewable and so on. So I think, the pushing 2050 carbon neutrality target to Asian countries may not be and will not be realistic. And so that is why, to be frank, I think it's extremely difficult to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality globally, because US and EU have committed 2050 carbon neutrality, and they are demanding developing countries as well to commit 2050 carbon neutrality. But having participated in climate negotiation for such a long time, the normal politics will emerge like this. The developing country will demand developed country to achieve carbon neutrality well ahead of 2040 or even 2035, so that there will be a sufficient carbon budget for developing countries, and therefore, and also on the top of that, they will demand the huge financial resources, financial assistance from developed country to developing countries for helping carbon neutrality by 2050. So if I were a developing country, I would develop such an argument. And whether a developed country can swallow that kind of request is a big question, and I doubt it. So therefore, I think carbon neutrality is a very much important target, and we should achieve that sometime in the future. But if we stick too much to 2050, then we cannot find a realistic solution. Then coming back to your question, so Asian perspective, I think we need to consider that their priority on climate change differs from developed countries one. In Sweden, they put climate change as the first priority, but in China, 15 out of 17 SDGs, and Indonesia, 9th out of 17 SDGs. So we need to acknowledge that reality. And also we need to acknowledge that the energy reality that, coal is still very much abundant energy resources, domestic energy resources, and the completely, say, rooting out coal use in Asian energy perspective, that will not be realistic. So realism and also affordability is very much important for embracing Asian countries to global endeavor for carbon neutrality.
Thank you. Realism and affordability. Key words, of course, for this. So I would stay in the same vein of what you said about the net zero emission goal. Let's stay on this with Yongping Zai. Yongping, I mean, do you really think it's the best strategy to solve the climate emergency?
Yeah, in Asia, as I live in Asia for so many years and working in Asian Development Bank, I think in Asia we have three things very top priority right now. One is economic continued poverty reduction, economic growth. That's one. The second one is environmental, like air pollution and climate change. I put them in one. That's environmental climate sustainability. And thirdly, currently, the pandemic is still ongoing, and this pandemic is affecting so many countries. We're facing three crises, and during these three crises, we need to look beyond the crisis and see by middle of this century whether we can achieve carbon neutrality. It's a difficult task right now. I want to come back to the concept of there is a stiff competition among countries, whether it's top leaders in this world, but they can compete among each other, and sometimes a very stiff competition. But I think there's one place they can cooperate friendly is going beyond themselves, going to poor countries in Asia, and going to poor countries in Africa and South America, and supporting these poorest countries, least developed countries, to go for peaceful, low-carbon transition with local resources, whether it's a biomass, hydropower, it can be solar, wind. So in these areas, I think these countries have very little to compete. They can also work together closely, helping these countries doing things step by step, going far. I think
Thank you very much, Yopi. Very extremely clear on this, and I think that, of course, we all agreed. But let me move again back to Luis de Mello. Luis, if this is the case, if this is what we want to achieve, what is the role for international organization, in particular for an international organization like the OECD, to facilitate it, to support this process?
Thanks, Antonio. This is a very important point, because we are talking about a public good here that requires then international cooperation, that requires dialogue, that requires a lot of solid empirical evidence on measurement of the issues at stake. Cost effectiveness of the different alternative tools that are available to policymakers at the national and at the international levels. So we are working on those fronts, contributing to the international debate, G20 and other fora, producing economic analysis on this, on outcomes, on policy strategies that can inform national choices, and it can inform debates at the national level. So this is all part of this process of achieving these agreed objectives. I would like also, Antonio, to recognize, because you mentioned it already, the important role that the task force on climate change, sustainable energy and environment of the T20 is doing under the leadership of Italy. It has been a huge pleasure and an honor for me to act as lead co-chair there. And there are a number of activities and work programs of the task force that are really closely related to a variety of issues that we've been discussing over the last hour. Issues related to the transition, to sustainability in cities, to circular economy, issues to green investment, to climate resilience, to agriculture, and so on. So a whole variety of topics that are very relevant to the recovery for a green future. Okay. This work is really to provide actionable advice to the G20 members, so that they can make the most of this recovery, to facilitate this cost-effective and inclusive transition that we are all aiming for, and at the same time raise awareness of what can be done at our individual levels, our institutional levels, our national, our transnational levels, so that we can all contribute to that end. So a final word here, just to recognize the very important contribution of the T20 task force, and that it can make in informing this debate beyond what we are talking among ourselves today, and what we can put on the table to the leaders that are meeting today somewhere else, but can hopefully read our contributions and bring that to the highest possible political levels.
Thank you very much, Luis. And of course, I remind to all the audience, international audience, if they want to have more information about the T20, you can go to www.team20italy.org, which is our website. But very briefly, because we are really running out of time, let me move to Chongyang. Luis mentioned the importance of information, of data, because they reduce uncertainty and they facilitate also investment, which are key, of course, for a green transition. So what can be done, very briefly, please, Chongyang, to divert investment from polluting and high carbon projects to green investments? Very briefly, please.
For the data and the transparency is the foundation for our cooperation for climate governance. But we need 2 steps to do it. The first step is communication and cooperation for different, particularly for our G20 members, carbon markets, environmental markets, and even between among the locals. Locals, governments, and even the business together, we can share the information by the communication, discussions, and particularly by the think tanks in universe. And the step 2 is
there is a problem with the connection, probably. Sorry, I think we lost Chongyang. The connection is down. Probably, I wonder if we will be back with us. We will see. So, in the meantime, I have to move. I move to Camilla. Camilla, very, very briefly, let us understand. We've been talking so far about Asian strategies, European strategies. We also mentioned that there are differences in the European, inside the European Union itself, but there are differences in Asia as well. So if you have to very briefly, tell us what the differences, for instance, in Asia, in their strategy, in China, Japan, South Korea, please.
Okay, I'm not quite sure if I fully understood the question, but thinking of what is special about the European strategy, I think first of all, and that links maybe to what Arima says, is that we have a certain understanding what is realistic and affordable. And I think the strategy in Europe considers not fighting climate change as not affordable. So, and they think it is realistic to rethink our whole industry, our whole sustainable growth model to a system which is realistically green and sustainable. So I think that is where they embark. And then they go to as a framework, they have the European Green Deal. And within the European Green Deal, they set out what you need for strategy, long-term targets and goals. That's the climate neutrality goal. That's the 55% emission reduction by 2030. But they also have a whole action plan to back that up. And then if you go down to the details, they have also proper fights.
We will all agree in Europe, Camilla, very brief.
No. We have proper fights. That is where I was coming, because Europe is quite an interesting animal as a supranational organization. And part of these fights, for example, just showed in the Common Agricultural Policy, where it was really difficult to make it compatible with the carbon neutral pathway, or we see it with the development of our energy sources. But we are willing to fight these fights, being committed to the carbon neutrality goal. And I think it will be interesting also how we spend the monies now in the context of the recovery to actually do no harm to this agenda, but actually further it.
Okay, so now we have to conclude with the last question, and I would like to conclude with an optimistic question to Van Ven. Then, do you expect that from today's meeting among the 40 leaders, there could be somehow, a relaunch of cooperation between the US and China?
Yes, I think this is a very, very important question. Very, very important expectation. So we all expect that the United States, China, as the two biggest economy, as well as the biggest carbon emission countries, can cooperate and sit together. I think the first step, they should united for help to show the greater powers and responsibility. There was 3 steps. First is that they always sit together and discuss face by face, and then even negotiate. No attack, just negotiate. Just cooperate and coordination first. Second is the 2 countries can unite to help those are developing countries. I think 3 points. One is a vaccine to help those developing countries to pass the pandemic as soon as possible. Second is to recover the economy as soon as possible. Then we have the carbon emission responsibility. So and the third is that I think we hope that the Biden administration can because Biden administration they has a historical responsibility, because as last year a lot of people they worried about the new Cold War happened between the United States and China. Now it's because of Biden the condition become much better than before. So we hope that the two countries can cooperate sincerely.
Thank you so much, Wen. So, I mean, we are perfectly on time, just 1 minute more than what we were expecting. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to all the panelists, and in particular, of course, to the Chongyang Institute for co-promoting this event with ISPI in the context of the T20. Thank you, and hope to see you soon, also not only virtually, but also in person. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.